My name's Stacey Joseph. I'm the Business Services Manager at the Tasmanian Chamber of Commerce and Industry. This morning's workshop is part of our funded program that we have funded through the Tasmanian Government, Department of State Growth and Jobs Tasmania. So we're able to bring these workshops to you with their support, and there's a whole series of these, and it's really aimed at helping inspire people on things that we can do to enhance or improve our workplace culture. Today's session is all about communication and culture, and we're going to look at how we can utilise communication to enhance or maintain our workplace culture. So this session is being recorded. There'll be an opportunity at the end to ask some questions if you'd rather not have them on recording. However, I'm also happy for people to shoot questions through as you like. I will try and operate the chat function as well as the presentation. But if I don't get you straight away, rest assured I will get there before we finish up the session. So we're going to cover in this session some workplace communication tips and tricks. Part of my role over the last 10 years with the Chamber has been delivering a lot of workplace training. And I would suggest about 80% of the training that we deliver is really centred around understanding and improving communication in the workplace. We'll look at what sort of workplace documentation we need to have in order to facilitate effective communication and support a great workplace. And that's going to be different based on the size of your organisation and how many staff you have. We'll also look at how we create a climate for continuous improvement. So people being able to suggest ideas and better ways of doing things. And we'll wrap up talking about the art or some tips for facilitating feedback within the organisation, and not just manager to employee feedback, but also employee to manager feedback to look for ways that we can keep getting better or improve. So let's start off with something that has become abundantly clear to me over the years is communication is not as simple as we think it is. Most people think that if they can read and they can write and they can speak and they can hear, that they have excellent communication skills. And I'm going to take you through a couple of examples today where communication that might seem really straightforward is complicated. And there's a number of reasons for that. So most of us can think of a time where we've said something to somebody or sent an email. What we've wanted to communicate is really clear to us, but the person or the people that have received that communication don't really understand it or interpret it the way we want them to. And that can be really challenging because we're, as humans, we're quite judgy. And so what we'll often do is, that person wasn't listening, that person didn't read it properly, that person doesn't care. When in actual fact, a lot of the time, it's just that somebody hasn't quite interpreted the message the way we intended them to. So if you've been to any training with me before, you would have seen this slide. It's something I use a lot because this quite busy looking slide is really explaining what's happening when we're communicating to people. And so the green circle is us with our message that we want to communicate to somebody else. And the purple circle is the person or people that we're communicating with. So in order for us to communicate anything, we need to put that message into words, and that might be verbally or it might be in writing. And so the words and the language that we choose is actually quite unique to each individual. And a lot of it comes back to our field of experience. So that might include things like people's level of education, their experience in your particular workplace or your industry sector. It might be cultural. It could be down to their own personal communication style. It might be, how they feel about the person that they're communicating with and the language that they choose. But the key is that each individual has a different field of experience, and that really shapes how we communicate. Something that we've thought about at the TCCI, we know what we do, we understand it. How do we make sure we communicate that in a language that the businesses that we want to work with can actually understand and relate to that message that we're trying to send? So what happens is we encode our message and we send it. So we either speak it or email it or leave a voicemail or a text message or, maybe an interpretive dance video if you're feeling particularly creative. And we send that over to that person or that group of people and hope that they're actually going to decode and interpret that message the way we want to. And a workplace policy is a great example of this, that we send out a policy and we think that it's great because it provides clarity about what we want to do. And then the people that get the policy perceive that policy as something that's negative, not something that's positive. So then we need to think about, how do we shift or adjust how we've delivered that message so that people actually interpret it the way that we wanted them to. And then if you follow the arrows, we're looking to get some feedback from that audience, whether it's one person or a group, that they've got the message the way we wanted them to. And if they haven't, we think about what we can do to help that understanding. And you'll see in the middle here, and I'm going to refer back to this common zone, is that's the overlap of our fields of experience and where our communication is shared. So if you work in a particular industry with a lot of jargon or acronyms, that common zone is a good example that we understand the same language as each other. It might be that we, have shared interests, or we've got, it's Tasmania, so we probably have somebody that we know through a different part of our life, but the common zone is where we have that overlap. And the bigger we make that common zone between us as the person that's sending the message and the people we're sending it to, then the less likely it is that our message is going to get lost. So really what this communication model is saying is that when we want to be communicating effectively, we need to put ourselves in the shoes of the person or the people that are receiving our message. And often we're really busy, we know what we want to say, we draft up the email or we say what we need to say, and we just assume that people are going to receive the message or the information the way that we wanted them to. And that's often where things can go astray. So I won't spend too much more time on that, but I think it's really important to understand that communication is not as simple as we think it is. It's actually quite a complex process, and humans are, notoriously unpredictable and different in how we interpret things. So if we're conscious of that when we're communicating, whether it's in a team meeting or just our standard daily emails, super important to be conscious that the person is not necessarily going to get the communication and receive it the way you want them to, unless you make a concerted effort. So some of the other considerations when we're communicating, and particularly when we look at culture, is that different people have different communication styles. And this is a really simplistic way of looking at it, but it's a nice, simple example that some people are super forceful and direct, and they're very to the point. And if you're a person that likes to communicate like that, then you'll probably appreciate that. I don't have to worry about any of the fluff. We get down to business, they say what they want, what they can do, what they can't do, and they move on. Whereas other people are much more relationship based. So they like to have a conversation, and we all know people that you start one conversation and the person you're talking to, or it might be you, goes off on a completely different tangent to tell you a story about something else. And you can see how the optimistic and fun talkative person and the forceful, direct, results-oriented person might really misunderstand each other. And if we don't manage that in the workplace, then that can often lead to some friction between different people. Then you've got your steady, relaxed, patient people that, they just get in and get their job done and kind of watch all of these other people doing what they're doing. And then we have our people that are all about making sure that we get things right and being accurate and precise in our information. And so what I've just described to you is a very, very basic overview of a DISC, which is a communication model. There's a whole bunch of them out there. Most people have heard of things like Myers-Briggs, but understanding that we have differences in our workplace and helping team members understand that just because that person isn't like you is not necessarily a bad thing. It means that they're probably going to be better at some of the things that you don't particularly like doing, and you might be better at things that they don't particularly like doing or don't come naturally to them. And my favourite line out of all of this is that 99.9% of people don't intend to upset or offend other people. They do it by accident, just by being themselves. So the harder some people try to communicate and get along better with others, sometimes it actually has the opposite effect, that it drives people up the wall. So when we're in a positive workplace culture, we understand that everybody has different communication styles, and there's a really fine line sometimes between somebody that's very assertive and direct in their communication versus when it falls into the realms of bullying type of behaviour. and helping other people understand the difference between those things. And that's really where our workplace documentation comes in, and I'll get to that in a second. But straight away, some ways that we can enhance or improve communication is to actually be listening to what people are saying and not saying in the workplace. You'll often hear offhand comments. One of the favourites that I get is, we just like mushrooms, you know, we're kept in the dark and we're fed on manure. And if people are saying things like that, to explore that, why do you feel that way? What information are you not getting? And try and understand what their issues are around the communication of information within your workplace. Don't dismiss complaints. Try and be curious as to why that complaint's happening. We can be a little bit guilty sometimes of going, oh, don't worry about that person, they're always complaining about that. To try and get to the bottom of it and whether there's anything that we can do differently that might help address whatever the complaint is. I think we do have a tendency to be quite judgmental and assume we know the causes of things. Sometimes when we're curious, we can learn something new. Creating opportunities for team members to get to know each other better. And that's that shared or that common zone that I talked about in that model of communication, because the better people know each other, the more they can understand each other and communicate better with them. And often that needs a little bit of prompting, like whether it's, you know, team meetings, or whether it's doing, you know, staff social events, or even getting team members to work on different tasks together. It's a great way to help people get to know each other and hopefully help the communication between different people within the organisation. Or if you're a large organisation, get some collaboration between departments. That's something I see a lot. If you have multiple parts of your business, you will find that there'll be that sort of, oh, everybody loves that part of the business and nobody cares about us over here. And if we can get some collaboration going, then it can sometimes be a bit of a reality check for people. The other thing is that we need to ask for and encourage people to provide feedback. So I'll talk a little bit more about that towards the end of the session, but this is not something that will come naturally to a lot of people. And depending on the history of your organisation, if you've had managers or supervisors in the past that have not really wanted to listen to feedback, then people won't volunteer it because they've been trained that nobody cares, nobody's going to listen, so there's no point in saying something. So sometimes we need to make a really conscious effort to encourage people to provide some feedback or suggestions, particularly where there might be some challenges with communication or perceived challenges about communication. If we can just get people to verbalise what they're experiencing, then sometimes we can give them some information that can help address anything that's not, you know, meeting their needs. All right, I'm just going to check. I can't even find the chat function. Here we go. Right, feel free to drop anything into the chat if you've got any questions or comments, or you can just, you know, chime in. I don't mind either way. Okay, so tips to enhance communication. So some of the tools that we can use in the workplace to facilitate communication, and this is going to depend on the size of your business, the industry you work in. It's not always possible to get everybody in the same room at the same time, but if you can, staff meetings are a great way to make sure that everybody gets the same information at the same time. And often people see these as a cost because we're sort of paying everybody to sit around. But I think it's really important to think of communication as an investment. It's an investment in our culture, and it's an investment in our people, not something that's a nice to do when we have time or nothing else to do. Or worse still, I've worked with some organisations that will only have staff meetings when they've got a whole bunch of negative stuff that they want to share with the team. And then staff meetings become something that people have this sort of negative association with, not an opportunity to communicate and share information. If you've got lots of people working lots of different times and shifts and those sorts of things, you might look at toolbox talks so that there's a smaller group of people, but a very, you know, consistent agenda across all of those groups. Great for workplace health and safety information, or policy or procedure changes for people to be able to communicate whatever's business relevant, but instead of getting everybody together, they can be nice and short and sharp and often held on the job. Other organisations like to use things like group chats such as WhatsApp or Teams or Facebook Messenger. Pretty important to have some guidelines around what's appropriate in those shared group chats. We don't want people taking over a business-related group chat with no photos of their cocktails or their new puppy or whatever it might be. We run 2 channels, so there's kind of a fun channel and there's a business-only channel within our WhatsApp. So we've kind of separated those things out, but very conscious of that, of making sure that there's no behaviour in those that could fall foul of bullying or harassment or discrimination. One-on-ones, whether or not you have them structured and regular, or whether it's just something that happens, informally in the workplace. Again, we get really busy. I know I've worked for lots of managers and our one-on-one meetings were always cancelled because they were too busy. I think that as long as you get the frequency right, you can have some pretty constructive one-on-one conversations with people, particularly people that don't enjoy speaking publicly. So not everybody's going to say what they think in a staff meeting because they're not necessarily confident or they don't feel comfortable to raise or make suggestions in a group setting. So one-on-ones are a really good way to get information out of people that might be a bit more reserved. And in my experience, some of those people that don't speak up in meetings often have the best ideas and the best feedback. We've just got to provide an opportunity for them to be able to contribute in a way that they feel comfortable. You might also look at team surveys. So, putting it out to the team. What do you like about our communication? How can we improve? Make it nice and short and sharp and get some feedback that way. Or you might have an old school suggestion box where people write on a piece of paper, or a virtual suggestion box where people can just go, I had an idea for this, and it's recorded and goes to the appropriate person. So there's a number of practical tools that we can use to help enhance our communication. We recently did a review of our staff meetings because we used to hold them, I think, like every fortnight. And we sort of felt like there wasn't, a great deal of value. It was kind of just a bit of an around the room and we already all knew what we were doing. So we changed the frequency of our staff meetings and a bit of the tone of the staff meetings so that we could make them more meaningful and that everybody that came got something out of it, as opposed to something that we have to do because it's in the calendar, but we're not really sure what we're there for. So you might look at reviewing those existing communication tools that you use and seeing if there are opportunities to improve or enhance, the return on investment for people's time in attending those. Okay, I will just pause there for a second. Are there any comments or questions on what we've chatted about so far? Nobody's frantically trying to get themselves off mute. Okay. All right, well, there'll be plenty of time at the end, so I will, now I've got to find the screen share again. Okay. All right. So that's a sample of communication and some suggestions. The next one is pretty important. So regardless of the size of your business, if you've got staff, you do need to have some workplace documentation. And workplace documents are actually an absolutely critical communication tool. From the moment where we recruit somebody and we provide them with a position description and an employment contract, those things start to set the expectations for what we want from people in our workplace. And so without those, we're kind of just assuming that people understand what we want, what the employment arrangements are, what that job entails. And without them, it's really difficult to actually manage somebody's performance and for them to manage their own performance. So policies and procedures are also quite critical in communicating our expectations. And it's twofold, because one aspect of policies and procedures is the compliance piece. and making sure that we've communicated about, the fact that we don't tolerate bullying in our workplace. These are the examples of bullying. This is what bullying is not. This is what you do if you feel like you've been bullied or harassed or discriminated against in the workplace. So absolutely critical from creating a safe work environment. But also in terms of if our policies and procedures are actually fit for purpose, and we live by them, we actually do what they say they do, then it also creates a climate of certainty around, I know that if this happens, then this is what the consequence will be. Or if I do this, then I'll get that. Or if I do this, then I'm doing my job well. We don't want people to be guessing what the expectation is. We don't want people to be guessing if they're doing a good job. So if you've got policies and procedures, but you're not really sure what they say, one of the things that you can do after this workshop is actually have a look at them and make sure that they reflect what happens in your workplace. Because as soon as we have a document that says one thing and a workplace culture that does another thing, those documents are not worth the paper that they're written on. And if you don't have documentation, and I'll go through the list of what you should probably have, I would strongly recommend having something. The risk to the business if we don't outline our expectations for how people communicate and behave in the workplace is quite significant. And I've seen businesses over the years that don't have this stuff written down, that have ended up having to pay significant amounts of compensation because people didn't know. They didn't know who to go to when they had a problem. They didn't know that they weren't allowed to do something, whatever it might be. Having a code of conduct or something similar. And look, you might argue it's really sad that we need to tell people how to behave like decent human beings. And hopefully you never need to use it. But a code of conduct really just outlines that we expect people to behave in a certain way, being respectful, being considerate of other people, not doing things in the workplace that cause harm to other people, and spelling that out in a document, because some of the most challenging performance issues to manage are behavioural issues. And if you don't have something that tells people how you expect them to behave, then it can be very grey for people to understand what's okay and what's not okay. And if you want to performance manage them, if you can't point back to something that they've signed off on, you have to start that process by introducing a code of conduct or similar. So you can say, this is the line in the sand, these are expectations, and then you can performance manage from there. And the documentation should ensure that consistency and clarity of expectations. And as I said before, it should be fit for purpose. So one of the services we provide includes template documents, but we'll always say to an employer, let's go through this and make sure that it actually fits your business. Like if we need to change some language, if we need to soften things or maybe make things a little bit more robust, let's do it to make sure that it actually reflects what you want your staff or your team to understand about your expectations. This is really important from a psychosocial hazard perspective as well. So if people don't know what's expected of them, or feel like it's not consistent, it creates an anxiety or a psychological uncertainty, and gives people a lot of room to kind of, I guess, play around the edges of what might and might not be acceptable. So whilst I'm not suggesting you need to have 4,000 policies and procedures, you do need to have enough that people have some level of understanding of what our expectations are of them and of everybody else in the workplace. So look, I'm happy for people to argue with me on this, but I would argue that must-have documentation is a code of conduct, or similar, you might call it something else. Every business should absolutely 100% have a bullying, harassment and discrimination policy. Changes to the legislation mean that all businesses now have what we call a positive duty to prevent sexual harassment and sex-based discrimination in the workplace. And what that positive duty means is that you have to do more than just having a policy. So this is not directly related to the topic, but I think it's important to know that, one of the things I've been saying to businesses, at the very least, you need to pull out a sexual harassment and discrimination policy and take people through it separately. Don't hand it to them in a bunch of policies and procedures and sign off collectively. I think you really need to separate that out. And I would argue bullying as well, to be very clear that these are our expectations. And if you are found to be doing anything that isn't consistent with this policy, you could lose your job. And it's as serious as that. So sexual harassment in the workplace is a summary dismissal or instant termination, obviously through a process. So don't just go around sacking people. There's a process that needs to be followed. But having those policies is absolutely critical, because if something happens and somebody is behaving in that way and you don't have a policy, you haven't got anything to manage them against. You need to have a process for how people raise complaints or grievances in the workplace, and that needs to be accessible for everybody. If you don't have a process, the policy is great, but then what do I do if somebody's breaching that policy? How do I actually do something about it? Position descriptions, look, they don't have to be detailed, but they do need to be a bit clear about the role, responsibilities and reporting lines. So where does my job finish and somebody else's job start? And that provides role clarity, which in terms of communication and culture is really, really, really important. We've all been in workplaces where somebody has gone, oh, I didn't think that was my job. I thought such and such was doing that. So if we don't have clear lines of accountability, it creates uncertainty. What will often happen is your best employees will end up doing more because they care and they've got that initiative and that engagement and want to make sure the business is successful. And some of the people that are quite good at going, oh, that's not my job, you know, somebody else is going to do that. It really creates an opportunity for them to kind of weasel out of having to do all of their job. So PD's position descriptions don't have to be war and peace. It just needs to be clear about what that person in that role or those people performing those roles are responsible for. And this is like, if you don't get this stuff right, it doesn't matter what sort of fabulous and wonderful rewards you give people, because if I don't I just dropped out. Yes. Where did I get to? Anybody? Nobody was listening.
How important, well, position descriptions, that they don't have to be war and peace, but they have to be, you know, clearly outline what people's responsibilities are.
Fantastic. So that's great. Thank you so much. I saw that the red had gone, but I wasn't quite sure how quickly I picked that up. Another reason why we stick with Teams, because it doesn't normally drop out in the middle of a presentation. So apologies. I'm glad I could join you again quite quickly. Yeah, so at the risk of repeating what I just said, if people don't feel like you have a workplace where it's clear who's responsible for what and that we manage that, so people are looking for fairness and consistency, you'll always have an underlying level of dissatisfaction in the workplace, because if I feel like I'm working harder than my colleague and nobody cares, you're at risk of losing the people that provide the most value to your organisation. And I often relate it to a sporting analogy. Like if you're out there, you want to make sure that the umpires are fair and they're equitable and we're treating everybody the same. And depending on who you're barracking for in the football match, you probably won't feel like that if your team's losing. But yeah, position descriptions really lay the foundation for good communication in the workplace. So don't underestimate the value of them. If you don't have them or they need updating, hot tip, you don't have to do it yourself. Get the people that are actually doing the job to review their position descriptions or to write them. And you actually get a dual benefit from that because A, you don't have to do the work yourself, amazeballs. But the second part is that you can actually do a sense check to make sure that what you think that person is doing is actually what they're doing. Because often people will take on additional roles and responsibilities or tasks over time. And sometimes the job that we employ people for is not actually the job that they're doing now. And that, you know, A, you don't want people to be doing stuff that they shouldn't be doing, but if they are doing more and adding more value to your workplace, you might need to look at their remuneration, particularly if you pay under the award or under an award, because the more responsibility people have, the more likely that they need to be paid at a higher level within that award. So you could also have a risk if somebody's performing higher duties and we're not compensating them for it, there is a risk that you might be actually inadvertently underpaying people. So there's a couple of very good reasons for that, but I think that that's the best way to do it, is to get people to write their own position descriptions or review them because you get lots of value out of that from a number of different aspects. Right. A performance and conduct policy and procedure doesn't have to be called this. It can be called anything, but it is, what is the process you're going to follow if somebody's not doing their job properly? You have to have a process. It's very handy from a manager's perspective if they don't do this very often. There are very specific steps as outlined in the Fair Work Act for how we need to manage performance. And if we don't do this stuff properly, you can find yourself in a world of hurt. There's a lot of risk with not managing performance properly. And there's even more risk if you don't manage performance at all. A lot of people will come to me after somebody has been underperforming for 12 months and they've known about this issue for a year and they've done nothing about it. And you think about that, what does that communicate to everybody else in your team or your workplace if somebody can be not performing and there are no consequences? So very important that we have a policy that allows us to manage this. And that we understand the value of proactively managing performance and conduct. I reckon about 80% of the performance management advice I give, they knew there was a performance issue when those employees were still in the probationary period. But we wait and we wait and we hope that magically it's going to get better, and then it doesn't, and then it becomes quite the process to manage people out of the organisation. So have a policy and a procedure. I actually reckon you could nearly download one straight off the Fair Work website. Okay. Sorry, there's just a little bit of noise. If you're not muted, could you just mute yourself? I can't see everybody. And the last point on documentation is that the size of your workplace determines how much documentation is required. So the smaller the workplace, the less workplace documentation we need. The bigger the workplace, so the more people we need to communicate with, the more we really need to have things written down, because the owner or the manager's not overseeing directly what people are doing. Whereas if we're in a small workplace and we can all see what we're doing and what we're not doing, then it's much easier for us to communicate some of those less procedural like things. And yeah, but the bigger the workplace, the more I'd suggest you want to have some comprehensive policies and procedures in place. Okay. Right, so that's that little bit. Questions, comments, complaints, feedback? Right. Okay. Alrighty, let's keep going then. Creating a climate of continuous improvement. So, part of my project, the Employer Choice Assist project, is helping businesses get to the stage where they can be recognised as an employer of choice. And one of the criteria is about how we actually facilitate people in our team making suggestions and being able to provide feedback on the workplace. And continuous improvement, so feeling like I can actually influence my workplace, is amazing and great for my job satisfaction, but it's also great for your organisation. We're the rate of change that businesses are facing at the moment is significant. Also, the cost of doing business just becomes more and more and more. So continuous improvement and getting everybody in our workplace involved in it is actually a great way for us to identify efficiencies and be more profitable. But we have to have a culture where people feel comfortable and are encouraged to put forward ideas and suggestions. I joke many times that the favourite saying of workplaces in Tasmania is that's not how we do things around here. And if that's our response when people make suggestions or have ideas, then they're going to stop giving us suggestions and ideas. And look, you might have to listen to 4,000 harebrained ideas, but the 4,001st one might be the best idea anybody's ever come up with. Or we might take bits and pieces from some of those suggestions to identify opportunities to improve what we do. It could be formal or informal, so you don't necessarily have to have, you know, an Excel spreadsheet set up for, you know, continuous improvement suggestions. However, if, you know, you've got a lot of them and you need to capture them somewhere, then that might be a great idea. You might have like a really simple Google Doc survey set up where people can just click, I've got an idea, and brain dump it there. You might have it as an agenda item at your staff meetings. Anybody got any ideas for some continuous improvement or how we can do things better? And I think if you can get people to start providing suggestions and ideas for improvement, we need to make sure that we're really, really committed to responding to those ideas so that people don't feel like they're just going into a black hole never to be seen again. And if they are, you know, really outside the box suggestions, to say that's an awesome idea, and if we had, you know, this many resources or this much money, then we could absolutely do that. But I love your thinking, like, you know, can we think about something that's more achievable, you know, with our budget and our resources? Also thinking about how you can reward those contributions, and that might be as simple as providing that positive feedback, like, thanks so much for coming up with that idea, that's great. Or it might even be, you know, if you've got a particular problem you need to solve or an area you want to improve, you might even have some sort of prize, whether it's a, you know, get to go home at lunchtime on a Friday, or, you know, you get a jazzed up rubber ducky with some, you know, sparklers on it, or whatever it might be. I was actually talking to an employer the other day, and they've implemented, it's a unicorn and its name's Dennis. It's a pink fluffy unicorn. And so people that live the values of the organisation, everybody can nominate people each month, and then they get Dennis the unicorn on their desk as the person. So it's a bit of fun. It's more the token, you know, everybody kind of has a joke about who's got Dennis. But, you know, just thinking about some creative ways that we can reward contributions. It's the whole, you know, Pavlov's dog. If you want to do more of something, then reward the behaviour. And get people to challenge the status quo. And you might just start with one little task or an area of the business, but just because that's the way we've always done things does not mean it's the best way. How can we do things differently to get a better result or to make our lives easier? The key is really about creating that, the environment where people want to contribute and feel safe to contribute. Really good thing to reflect on as part of this workshop is, you know, what is our appetite for change and for improving? How do you think people in your team would respond if you ask them for ideas and suggestions? You know, would they be falling over themselves to contribute, or would they be reluctant because they're worried that they're going to be made to feel silly, or their idea is going to be rejected? And then working out how we can, I guess, create a more favourable climate for continuous improvement. So that sort of feeds into the feedback piece, and feedback, I think, is a loaded term. If somebody said to me, I'd like to give you some feedback, I probably wouldn't be anticipating a pat on the back. I'd probably be like, uh-oh, what have I done wrong? Not saying that I'm a bad employee, of course, but lots of people view feedback as a negative thing. So the first tip I have in terms of feedback is make sure that your feedback is balanced. So some of us are hardwired to say really nice things to people all the time. Other people are more hardwired to be focused on what's wrong. And thinking about like yourself as a manager and a leader, or the managers and leaders in your workplace, and really making sure that we think about how we can provide both positive and negative or constructive feedback, because the negative stuff is much more readily received if they feel like there's some positive as well. The old school management style is, if I'm not talking to you, then you're not doing anything wrong. You could operate like that, but you won't get the results that you'll get if you really look for opportunities for the positive and the negative feedback. Our feedback has to be actionable. So, you know, that's not good enough, or that was, you know, being broad is not helpful. It's be specific, give people information that they can actually act on and do something about. This is actually also important if you're managing performance. There needs to be some really clear direction and support for people to take the action to close the gap, as opposed to just be faster, be better, be whatever. You know, give me some examples of things that I can do, or things that I'm doing that you really value. And that positive feedback, I call it good dog feedback, like, oh, great job. Great job on what? Why was it a great job? Are you just saying that because you think it's the right thing to say? Like, actually pinpoint the example. I saw the way that you dealt with that situation, and I thought that that was really professional. That's awesome, as opposed to, good job, matey. You know, we want to make sure that we're giving people feedback that's actually meaningful, whether it's negative or positive. Feedback should be timely, and this really depends on the context. So clearly we don't want to be embarrassing people in front of colleagues or customers. So if it is something negative, then most of the time it's more appropriate to take somebody offline, somewhere private, to say, oh, that was really not okay. But I think there's some exceptions to that. So things like people that are using their mobile phone when they shouldn't be. I'm not going to pull somebody into the office. I'm just going to say, put your phone away. If it's a PPE issue, we're not going to wait and pull them aside to go, can you please put your hearing protection on, or can you wear a high-vis vest? We're just going to deal with it because it's very transactional. Whereas other things, so I'm working with a client who one of their colleagues said something quite inappropriate at the end of interviewing a candidate for a role. And they were so upset and taken aback by what their colleague said that they sat on it for 2 weeks. And then they decided to do something about it. And I was like, no, that is something that you should have prioritised and dealt with straight away. We don't hang on to it for 2 weeks and then make a big deal about it. We should have made a big deal about it as soon as we could, as close to the event as we could. Obviously, if somebody's in a very heightened emotional state, so quite upset, probably not the best time to provide them with some feedback. So we might wait for them to calm down a little bit, or pick it up the next day. So the timing is about when you're going to get the best result for providing that feedback, not when it suits you.
Yeah, I'll just
Sorry, there's somebody there that's not on mute and it's loud.
do this in-house. It would be a 4-day training fee of 2,500.
So I can't see who is not on.
So the half-day training rate is 18 as opposed to.
Right, I think that's fixed it. Sorry, that's very distracting for me, and I'm sure for you. All right, so we're talking about giving timely feedback. The second or the fourth one I think is super important. Often what happens is that we're aware of something, and I'm talking about negative feedback now. We're aware of something being an issue and we let it go, and then straw breaks the camel's back. And we're like, that's it, I've had enough. That person, blah, 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 I'm going to tell them. When we're feeling like that, the best thing we can do is stop, take a breath, and actually proceed by asking some questions. And the manager I was working with had this, they'd heard that some of the team had been behaved very inappropriately in an external training room. And instead of coming in and being curious about what happened yesterday, blah, 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 they just came in guns blazing and ripped shreds off everybody in the room. Upon further investigation, the version of the story that manager heard was not actually what happened. And so that manager has gone in to do I'm going to give you some feedback. And what they really should have done is stop, took a breath, and gone, can you tell me about what happened yesterday? Because it's that old Venn diagram of their story, their side of the story, my side of the story, and at some point those two stories will overlap and the truth is in the middle there. So being curious when you need to provide feedback is really important to make sure that we don't jump to conclusions, we don't make assumptions, and we actually get the full story. Also a very important part of procedural fairness when we're managing performance. So be curious, not judgmental. And you have to make a concerted effort at that because we're actually naturally very judgmental. All right. We also need to be consistent. So we should have the same standard for everybody. Yes, some people might be capable of more, but our feedback has to be consistent. If that's a good job for one person, it's a good job for somebody else. And we need to be really impartial to make sure that we're actually treating everybody fairly. As humans, we do tend to like some of our team members more than others. So we just need to be really conscious that the people that aren't necessarily our people, we are treating everybody the same in terms of our expectations, our communication, and our feedback. And we should be making feedback something that's regular, not cut and paste regular feedback, but, trying to look for those regular opportunities to give people feedback in the workplace. And we really want a culture where everybody feels comfortable to give feedback. It's not just a management to staff member scenario. And that does require, actively creating a climate for that. So having that culture where everyone feels comfortable to give and receive feedback is absolutely an investment in your organisation and your business. Okay, so some practical tips. I will send you a copy of this presentation. Sorry, I should have said that at the beginning. If you're really lucky, you might even get a copy of the recording. Consider ways that you can collect and respond to feedback and suggestions for improvement. Each workplace will have different, take up of technology. So there's lots of great platforms that you can do that on. But if you still prefer a suggestion box and a bit of paper, then there's nothing wrong with that. Start small. So improvements can and should be incremental. Big shifts require a lot of energy and a lot of resourcing and can be quite confronting for people that don't enjoy change. And there's, about half of the workforce on average, the word change will strike fear into their hearts. So I also don't talk about change. I talk about shifting and adjusting things. But yeah, so start small. Maybe add continuous improvement suggestions to your meeting agendas or get people to come along with some ideas on how we could do things differently or better. Make sure you're leading by example and celebrating successes where we have implemented a change and it's worked well. That, your leaders and managers are thinking about ways that we can do things differently, but getting buy-in from the team as opposed to just handing down these changes or these improvements without consulting with people. And that, is a key part of our communication and culture is that consultation. So if we're doing stuff in the workplace, let's not make it a surprise. Let's talk about it with the team in whatever channel you use before we implement those changes. Because if people feel like it's being done to them, they're much less likely to engage in it and it'll take you longer to get buy-in. Whereas if you consult with people along the way, they'll feel like they're part of that change process as opposed to just a number in a line. Okay, so summary, you should be looking at how in your workplace you can understand and embrace different communication styles. And that might be simple things like getting people to work together on projects. It might be doing some in-house training or some external training to really uncover people's communication styles and create some ways that you can kind of leverage those strengths and limitations with people's communication. Consult with your team about the communication in your workplace, like what's working and what isn't. If you've done my workshops before, you'll have heard this. I like the start, stop, keep. So you pose the question. So it would be, if we wanted to improve communication in our workplace, what should we start doing? What should we stop doing? And what should we keep doing? So what do you want? What don't you want? What do you want us to, what do you actually like about what we do? Really simple. Make sure that you've got the key workplace documentation to communicate and manage expectations and that it's actually reflective of what you do, not the document that you downloaded for free, 14 years ago and you think it's still okay, have a look at those and make sure that they're accurate. And actively encourage feedback and suggestions for improvement. So recognise that people aren't just going to come rocking into your office and give you suggestions. Some people will, but most people won't. So you've kind of got to really proactively go out and seek that feedback. So who can help you? So if you have 20 or less FTEs or around that, we do have a program at the moment. We can work with you for free on pretty much anything we talked about in this session this afternoon now. We'll send you through some information on how you can engage with that program. If you have more than 20 FTEs, we can also still provide support. It's just that you might have to pay a little bit of money for it, or it might be part of your membership. But we do all of this stuff. The people, soft skills, human resources, workplace culture is absolutely our jam. So that was a little plug for us. And then we also have some great content coming up online over the next sort of month or so. So on the 17th of October, we've got an online session about some tips and tricks for employing young people, particularly relevant. And we've actually partnered with Headspace Hobart, who are a youth mental health service. So I think that'll be a really great session. We've also got a new series. So if you are a member or you're a member of one of the chambers that are part of our Chamber Alliance, we've got a cost of doing business series. So this is us kind of responding to what our members are telling us in terms of their needs. As a member, it's free of charge. We'll have one session every few weeks. There'll be 5 sessions. So the first one's about managing costs, and we've actually got partnered with an accounting firm as well as an energy organisation that can save you money on your energy bills to deliver that. So if you haven't already registered for those, we'll send you some links to do that. If you're not a member, it's $100 a session, but if you're a member, it is full free. And then we've got the Managing Performance and Attitude workshop, which is part of this series. And that will be on the 15th of October. And we'll talk about how we can manage performance and attitude in the workplace. So some good free stuff coming up if you've got some time to book in. Most of those will be recorded. So we can hopefully share those with you if you're not able to attend on the day. All right. Time for me to stop talking. Questions or comments?
Yeah, hi Stacey. Just so you know, the majority of the colleagues people that we have people in roles that are new to them.
Okay.
And in supervisory roles and looking after people. And our industry is very, how would you say, very fluid, very dynamic. It's always shifting and changing. And probably one of our biggest pain points is staffing and retention of staff and availability of staff. And as you know, like you would know better than anybody that in Tasmania, it's a bleeding point. And what we want to do is sort of help people. For instance, Dylan looks after Launceston Airport, probably been in the role as a supervisor there for 3 months? 3 months thereabouts. So we're looking to these seminars as a way of information coming through into our business that helps people understand how to get through things, because that's a dynamic workplace. And, you know, things are happening rapidly. So that's the reason for us being in this, and especially like the next one as well, with the performance and managing performance, etc.
Yes.
That's what we're looking for. So that's the makeup of why we are